your projects.
Hello. I'm going to sort of just apologise for the moment. I'm not used to using slides or talking to a script, but normally I invite people into the library and actually show them the items in our collections, but you're such a big group that wasn't going to be possible. So I hope you enjoy my slides and find it both informing and inspiring. So women have a long interest in the development of zoology, even before ZSL was established almost 200 years ago. And via art and illustration, women managed to gain a foothold and in some cases earn an income. Many of the women are relevant today as trailblazers, and particularly as there's a need to encourage greater diversity to address the conservation challenges that we're facing. So when did women first develop an interest in zoological art? Well, I'd like to think that they were involved in cave art, and these are some reproductions you can see in the West Tunnel at London Zoo. I don't know if you came in that way, but as you go through the tunnel, do have a look at the artworks. In the early modern period, the known world expanded for Europeans, and knowledge of newly discovered animals increased, and women were involved in explaining, classifying, collecting, describing, and illustrating those animals. And some of them earned an income in that way. And I want to celebrate the achievements of many of these women. Often there were many barriers to having a career in zoology, and art was the way in. So today I'm highlighting the work of several women, and some of the earliest we have, and the youngest, are by the two teenage daughters of Martin Lister, who was president of the Royal Society. He very much recognised the importance of illustration when describing animals, and illustrations are expensive. And the angel shark picture I've got over there, that's from a book on fish that the Royal Society did, and they almost bankrupted them. The engravings were so expensive. But luckily they carried on, they're still around today. But Martin Lister decided to train his two teenage daughters to illustrate animals for him. And they used microscopes. As you can see, they've carried out dissections and very carefully illustrated the microscopes. So these are from 1694. They're very, very old. They carried out the whole printing process in the home, as well as examining all of the specimens as well. The girls often added a decorative border to the illustrations. So these are two different cowrie shells, one where they've added a border and one where they haven't. I just imagine they thought it was fun. I can't think why else they did it, unless they thought they were going to cut them out and stick them on the wall. A contemporary was Maria Merian, a German-born entomologist and artist. Her careful observations of insects showed that insects actually had a life cycle. They laid eggs, they had larvae, chrysalis, and then adults in the case of butterflies. At the time, it was thought that flies just erupted from dirt, and that they didn't associate flies with maggots. So she was one of the first people to actually show that insects have a life cycle. She produced works depicting European insects and their life cycles, and then at the age of 52, in 1699, she sailed to Suriname in South America to illustrate the insects and their life cycles there, and she was accompanied by her daughter Dorothea. The results of this journey was her magnum opus, The Insects of Suriname, but she also included books on illustrations of reptiles and amphibians. This one's thought to be by Dorothea, her daughter. So the published book is copy 1726. She died in, I think it was 1716, but Dorothea carried on with the work. And one of the things she observed was the Suriname toad, which I don't know if you've come across. We do have some, but the eggs and the tadpoles develop on the back and then erupt out. And she was one of the first people to scientifically describe this and illustrated it.
Did the eggs actually pop out from the back, or
they're laid on the back, and then it just develops a skin over them, and the eggs develop in there and then the tadpoles burst out.
Oh.
It's quite a sight. I've seen it, and it's
Yeah, I know some people
Yeah.
think
I
it's really
thought
gross when I mention
It's
it.
not. It's
I
not.
thought
Yeah.
Folks like that would get would lay out in a different way.
Yeah, they're usually in ponds or so. It has to be in water. Yeah. I just imagine, if you can, in 1699 going to Suriname to the rainforest to observe insects.
Yeah.
And people just thought she was so strange, and the way she had to dress as well. Unfortunately, she became ill while she was there and came back sooner than she anticipated, and that's partly why she'd never managed to do a book on amphibians and reptiles. So I thought this is an interesting. I think you're all from South London, aren't you? But Osterley Park is in West London, and it belonged to Sarah Child, who came from a family of wealthy bankers, and she collected birds in a menagerie there. She commissioned the whole Hayes family to illustrate the birds in her collections. So William Hayes was to write and describe the birds, but with his second wife Matilda doing the illustrations, and then they were illustrated by Emily Ann and Etta Maria, their 4 daughters. And each copy of this book is different, because whenever they received an order for a book, they just grabbed whatever was to hand. There was no consistency. So our particular copy actually has original artworks in, as well as engravings which have been coloured. So it's really interesting to actually compare copies. But like the Hayes, other less wealthy women were trying to earn an income in this way and keeping the work in families. So here we've got one of the most magnificent books on herpetology, primarily on amphibians, and this wonderful title page has got a mixture of amphibians on it, and then inside it illustrates again the life cycle of the frogs. And this was published 1758, and Katrina Barbara Rosal van Rosenhoff actually did some of the illustrations and hand-coloured them. So women were depicting animals which are from life, which are now extinct. So here we have the American passenger pigeon, a male and a female, and they're extinct. But she also illustrated the Mauritian pink pigeon, which is the focus of one of ZSL's conservation programmes as well. Sarah Bowditch was an artist, traveller and writer, and she went on 2 visits to Africa. The first to Ghana, and then she and her husband Thomas went to work with Cuvier in Paris to use his laboratories and library so he could prepare for an expedition to Gambia. But Thomas died in Gambia, so she was left there with their children making collections, and when she came back she published the husband's book. And now, I know these fish are really strange looking and they're not her best illustrations, but she actually described 22 new species of fish and a new genre as well. So she had her children and later her elderly mother to support, and she had to write and illustrate to earn an income. Before Thomas's death, he received all the credit for the work, but she had to step out into a more public role once he died. And quite frequently women hid behind the work of their husband, brother, or another member of the family. Unfortunately at ZSL we don't have a copy of her wonderful work, Fishes of Great Britain, which is absolutely fantastic. If you have a chance to see it, please go and see it. It was actually on display at the British Library the year before last. I've been told that there's a copy in the Royal Collection, but only 43 were published. And she did paintings of every fish in Britain by hand.
Wow.
For each one. It wasn't actually printed. And she was very, very keen to do the fish soon after they were cooked because they lose colour very, very quickly. So if you try to illustrate a fish that's dead, it probably looks very, very different from how it does when it's alive. But I'll put this book on the table so you can have a look at them more closely. And if you do ever have a chance to see it, I would really, really recommend it. Just look out for it in exhibitions. I wish we had a copy, but we don't. So throughout the 19th century, wives and daughters of scientists were often editing the works of their husband and providing illustrations. And ZSL then, as now, had an important role to enable women and men to develop their knowledge of zoology and network. So ZSL was established almost 200 years ago in 1826, and in 1827 women were admitted as fellows, which is our members. And this is actually from our council minutes, saying that women were admitted on the same basis as men. And this is very, very unusual because learned societies often didn't want to admit women or discourage women to join, and many of them didn't actually let women join until the 20th century, almost 100 years later. So one of the women associated with ZSL was Elizabeth Gould, who married, she was Elizabeth Coxon, and she married John Gould, our curator of birds. Once he left ZSL, he continued with his interest of birds and was very involved with us. But he decided to publish large folio volumes of illustrations trying to show birds life size. And they used a new technique called lithography, where they used a limestone plate and drew on it with the waxy material and then print from that, and then the plates were hand coloured. So Elizabeth was a talented artist, and during their 12-year marriage, she did 600 of these lithographic plates. And Edward Lear, who's probably better known for his nonsense poems, but you probably don't know them if you heard of The Owl and the Pussycat Went to Sea. He's better known for that, but he's a wonderful zoological artist, and he helped to train Elizabeth. She accompanied John on a 2-year expedition to Australia, where she illustrated birds and mammals for his volumes. But she also illustrated the birds in the zoology of the Voyage of the Beagle. And so we've got finches here that Darwin described and used as an example of natural selection. And these are all birds that he came across on the journey. In Victorian times, there was a craze for seashore collecting, and women were active participants, as you can see in this cartoon that was in Punch. And it was partly encouraged by these wonderful illustrations by Elizabeth Bowes Goss. She illustrated her husband's books. She's not credited, she's not mentioned on the title page at all, she's almost invisible, but she did the illustrations, and these were so fantastic. His books did really, really well, and that encouraged the interest in marine wildlife. Women were trying to earn an income as authors, taxidermists and illustrators, but they could also earn an income as colourists. And in Edinburgh, William Lazar set up a colour room using women. The women were paid on piecework, each one that they coloured, and he charged 3 pence per plate, so they probably got very, very little. With his brother-in-law Jardine, they published the popular 40-volume Naturalist Libraries, which was comparatively low in price, encouraged an interest in zoology. Our librarian, Richard Bowdler Sharp, was appointed in 1867, and he had 10 daughters, and 9 of them worked as colourists. There was a market for beautiful, illustrated, large volumes, and you know, when you're describing birds, the colours are so important, otherwise it's really, really difficult to identify them. So they were very, very careful with their colouring. And even today, illustrations are often used rather than photographs. The eldest daughter, Emily Mary, was an entomologist, and she mounted insects and handled sales of insect collections, and she charged a commission. She published in our scientific journals, and most of her papers between 1891 and 1900 are illustrated by Maud Foreman Fisher. And there were several women earning money by doing illustrations in our publications. I've done a blog about Maud Foreman Fisher, but you can see she was illustrating insects and mammals I haven't come across any birds that she did, but it was definitely a way for her to participate in zoology. And as the 20th century developed, women could do, more opportunities opened, and women could do degrees in zoology. And during our First World War, we appointed our first woman keeper, who showed people how to keep chickens for eggs. And we appointed our first woman curator, Lucy Evelyn Cheeseman, and she was curator of insects, appointed as assistant curator in 1917. But she enjoyed going on expeditions so much, she left and did many self-funded expeditions, and the illustrations in her books are based on her sketches. And if you can see, that's meant to be her looking at rather worriedly at a crocodile. In 1923, we appointed Joan Proctor, and she soon became curator of amphibians and reptiles. She wrote many articles and papers as well as a talented artist. At the opening of the aquarium in 1924 by George V and Queen Mary, the seaweeds hadn't grown, and she used her skills to make fake seaweeds, and nobody seemed to notice. She also designed the then reptile house, and when she was appointed, the press was shocked, and she kept this scrapbook of newspaper articles about her appointment, and actually she says in white there that this particular interview was made up, and she hadn't spoken to the journalist, and neither had any of her family, and they just made it up, which is just appalling. But she was a talented artist, and these are some of the illustrations that accompanied some of her papers in our scientific publications. But several women were illustrating their own works. So Marie Laborde, she studied zoology at Newcastle and then moved to Leeds to do a PhD, and then worked at the Marine Biological Association. And she illustrated her papers, and you can see these are marine, they're crab larvae, and you can see they almost look alien, I think. They don't really look like actual animals, but she illustrated her own papers. And although women were beginning to get formal academic qualifications in zoology, you could still just do art as a way in. And Elsie Sexton worked at the Marine Biological Association as well, illustrating her papers. And she worked on 35 species of amphipod crustaceans, describing many for the first time. And she published over 30 research papers until 1951. So you could still, at the time, get in via art rather than zoology itself. In our collections, we've got other artworks. So these are original artworks by Liliati Daff, who was a New Zealand artist. Women were illustrating the London Transport posters. There's a book there. Can you hold it up? Yeah, thank you, that one. Many of the illustrations in there are by women as well. This is some original artwork. We have a map of the zoo that was used as the basis of one of those illustrations. So I've talked about the past, but what now? So we use art to inspire and inform people about animals and the need for conservation. This mural on the side of the old aquarium depicts many of the species that we're involved in conserving now. Their conservation priorities for ZSL, and some of these are extinct in the wild. Similarly, with the sculptures across our site, Wendy Taylor, who did this stone beetle, is keen for people to touch and engage with her sculptures. And these are a wonderful example. I often see children touching them and climbing over them, and they're just to the left here, if you want to go up and see them in a moment. Animals in the zoo have been subjects of many sculptures in her works, and all the sculptures in tiger territory are by women. This mural in the tunnel at Whipsnade Zoo was designed with the help of local young people with special educational needs. And recently, we took part in a NERC-funded Refugia project, a collaboration between ZSL and New Art Studio to engage with asylum seekers and refugees. and what's going on? So we were able to share insights and talk about urban conservation with them. And scientific illustration is still essential, and certainly drawing skills are so useful to students studying zoology. Field guides often contain illustrations and emphasise particular distinguishing features of various species. And this is a perfect example by one of the volunteers we have in our library. She's a scientific illustrator, Sandra Doyle, and she's illustrated a coral reef. And you couldn't possibly take a photograph like this. It has to be an illustration because you would never see all those animals together at the same time. So it's a perfect way to be able to show the biodiversity of a coral reef. Heidi Mark, who is a career researcher at Institute of Zoology, is a scientist and artist. Do read her blogs on the website. And Heidi says, research has shown that creative people in science and art share strikingly similar personality traits, have comparable cognitive skills, and that practice of the arts is related to success in the field of sciences. I want to emphasise that art and science are complementary to each other and can inspire people to take action, whether it's to develop a career in conservation or as a citizen scientist, to live more sustainably and to engage with nature and to care about nature, to want to conserve it. So that's a rather quick introduction to women in zoological art. I haven't talked about all the women. I'm gratified that there's many more women I could have talked about. So we've gone from 17,000 years ago to the present. I've put out a display of books which might interest you, and some of them are here. And I've put out a display as well of images of extinct and rare species. So do have a look at those as well. I think the pink-headed ducks are an interesting example. We've got black and white photographs of them. They just look like any other duck. You know, they're extinct now. That's the only way you can see the colour. And they are rather stark in colour. Do visit ZSL Library and Archives if you have a chance. Please just email us. It's library@zsl.org. Just to let us know you're coming in. And you can have a look at the books, and it's just a small selection I brought. You can come in and browse. If there's any of the artworks I've talked about you'd like to see, just let me know. Take a look at our blogs on the website. There's lots of information there. And our catalogues, have details of our artworks, often with thumbnail images as well, so you can see them, but not the illustration.